Hello and welcome to a video interview with Barry Epoch Topping, the composer of Paradise Killer. I am Ollie, the creative director on Paradise Killer, and I'm joined by Phil, the technical director.
Hello.
And we're going to have a chat with Barry, who is, as I said, the composer of Paradise Killer and did nearly all the music in it and all the sound design.
As well as being the voice of Dr. Doomjazz.
Yes, he plays one of
That's
the
the one I'm
characters.
personally most excited about. That's definitely the highlight for me. So.
Yeah, if you played the game, the demo, then you will maybe recognise his voice. If not, then go and check it out.
Yeah, I'd say that in comparison to some of the other characters, there is definitely a level of I'm enthusiastic and I'm here in your delivery.
That's how I feel. I'm just happy to be representing.
There's a few lines when I was listening to it when he sent the takes over, and there's just a couple of one-shot lines like "wonderful," and I just sitting there giggling away to myself, imagining you recording them in the room you're there now, just shouting out "wonderful" into a mic.
I see Doomjazz as the ambassador with the Pyramid of Ferrero Rocher. So that's what I tried to put across with that performance. I feel like he's very much that character at some
I
point.
should have put one
Nailed it.
in his boat.
On the yacht. Oh.
Yeah. Right, so
Yeah, that's not the important thing. The important thing is the music.
the music in this game is killer. It is what we wanted to do with the Paradise Killer soundtrack is do something really unique and have a really memorable soundtrack, influenced by kind of city pop and a bit of vaporwave and a bit of future funk, and really capture what it's like to be on this weird, surreal paradise island. The game is about a mass murder, and you're an investigator trying to solve the mass murder. But we didn't want it to be all super grim and nasty. We wanted it to be somewhere that you can go on holiday to and chill out. So, as a composer, how do you tackle mass murder but also summer vibes?
Well, vibes is a word that's going to be used a lot throughout this. But like you said, when we had the kind of starting point of the brief of that city pop style, it applies very well to the island, to the physical environment of the island itself, because that even the island to me has a lot of similarities to like city pop album cover art. Because the thing about city pop albums is all the album art is really vacant. They look like vacated scenes almost. And the island to me feels like that. It feels like there was once so much life here and now there isn't. And the music, I think city pop is almost a bit lonely anyway, like in how it sounds. So my starting point for the music was, how do we make an original city pop influenced soundtrack that can be applicable to the setting and the themes across the game? And really the main way I did that is just by making sure we had a variety of different styles, borrowing from a central pool of our pre-established vibe and just making sure that vibe was baked into all these slightly stylistically different songs, so they still felt appropriate for whatever you were doing at the time.
So most games,
some people might not be familiar with what city pop is. Do you want to kind of explain how you interpret? Obviously, it's quite a big genre. But
Yeah. Well, city pop came out of Japanese new music, which was when Japanese music really started being influenced by Western music. So towards the end of the 70s, city pop came out, and it's always accredited as coming out around the same time there was like the Walkman boom and people first started getting like CD players in their cars. So it's all music that's made and conjures up the vibe of a big city. That must have been where it came from. It's like you put city pop on, it's like, oh, it's 1987, I'm in Tokyo, I'm having a great time. So that's kind of where it came from. And lasted from the end of the 70s all the way through to the 90s. There's like a weird parallel in Japan with the way city pop was for them was kind of like the way hair metal was for us. Like it was the excess of the 80s represented musically, and then when the Japanese financial crash kind of happened, that was the end of city pop, and it got replaced by, I guess, Visual K, which is obviously pretty different stylistically. So it's just a late 70s 80s style of Japanese music that borrows from Western styles like AOR or jazz fusion or funk, that sort of thing, and has this like that, it paints this palette of like Tokyo in the 80s meets kind of island beachy vibes. There's always like a tropical underpinning to it, which again is why it fits the game so well.
The thing I love about it is how laid back it is. So it's there's again like a range of styles in there, but with a lot of city pop, it is music that you can just put on, and you can imagine like driving through a city when it's kind of semi-deserted and sunset's coming down, or you can be on a beach and just relaxing and enjoying it. And it's like this disco beat, but without the intensity of it all the time. So it makes it a really good match for the kind of exploration side of the game. So I think you've done a really good job of nailing that merge of what we want design-wise and what we want from the soundtrack as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that was cool about the soundtrack is also what's cool about the game. It presents something that, if you looked at it on the surface, you're like, oh, these kind of vaporwave visuals. But you know from having made the game, and I know from having played the game, that the island is a lot more than that. Like, it's not just this surface level, oh, it's a vaporwave game, it's a city pop game. There's like a lot more different styles to it and a lot more themes. And I feel like I really wanted to put that across in the soundtrack and not just make, 20 city pop tracks. Just have a nice spread of stuff that fits.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
With the visuals, we never wanted to do like a gimmick, like a visual gimmick. Like some games, especially some indie games, are very much based around, we're calling back to the specific pixel style, or we're doing this one visual trick and that's the entire game. We wanted to make a game that you get in and live in and explore and have these different things. So we start off with obviously a very kind of city poppy vaporwave stuff, but then it also gives way to this kind of ancient Sumerian religious kind of architectural style and a lot of marble and stuff, and I think the blend of styles really helps carry that through.
Yeah, the thing I think's interesting is like there's such a theme of excess and all that stuff and like opulence, and I feel like the music we've made is like very opulent because in this world you've created, like why wouldn't city pop exist?
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And when I made the soundtrack, I didn't want it to sound like, oh, I've just written a bunch of sounds to kind of play over the game. These songs exist in the world.
Yep.
They became kind of part of the world and that mythos, and I feel like it's excessive, it's luxurious, much like the world is.
I think it's luxurious as well. Like whenever you listen to a track, there's so much going on in the track, it's like there's always different elements to find and kind of vibe to. Like I was having a slightly stressful day yesterday, but then I fired up the game to play and I just sat on the main menu for a while, just chilling with that, because that is a really like chill vibe. Again, we're just using the word vibe over and over and over again. Kind of track that's just kind of like blissful, but you could totally soak into it. And then you get into the game and
vibes, man.
Yeah, all that water and aesthetic. Yeah, need a bottle of that. What's it, Fiji water or whatever it is that appears in all the vaporwave art.
Yeah.
Paradise Killer will replenish your electrolytes. Guarantee.
So there's a big range of tracks in there. Like we've got something like Go Go Style, which you can hear. We kind of released it a couple of weeks ago, and that's quite an aggressive sound, I think. But then you move on to something like Sunset Song, which is this really, really laid back kind of 80s vibe. So when you are sitting down to create a track, what's your process? Do you decide you want something that's kind of full on or something that's relaxed, or do you just start and see if the track reveals itself to you?
We knew what we needed because of the way the game plays, and always when I think about Go-Go Style, I always think about like pounding pavement. It's like it's totally just being out there, moving, and obviously movement is a big part of exploration. Mm-hmm. So I knew that we needed stuff like that, and then that has to be offset by a spectrum of stuff, some stuff in the middle that borrows from some of that and some of the chill stuff, and then all the way along the chill. So say I had like three or four different styles in mind of. I say styles, more dynamics is a better word. So these sort of different dynamic categories of songs. And then it's really just a case of sitting down and writing stuff. I mean, Go-Go Style, for example, started with the bass riff. It was just like the bass riff in a drum pattern, and that's all that song was for 2 months. And then that's a good example, actually, of writing a song. That was one of the first songs I wrote and didn't touch it for months, and then came back to it once I'd established a lot of other stuff, and it was just the easiest thing to write. And like, I was so happy with how it turned out, because I knew what style I wanted it to have, but I waited until it could be better informed by the other songs. So that started off as just a bass riff and a drum pattern, and then Lady Blue, which is another song we put out, that was just a chord sequence. So everything was a mix of, because I can play a whole bunch of instruments a wee bit. Like some of these were started as guitar ideas, some of them were started on piano, some of them were started on bass, some of them were started as drum patterns. So there was really no kind of through theme in how they were started, but they were all just like small seeds of ideas.
So one of the interesting ones, I think, for me is House of Bliss, because that came in really late. Like that replaced something else. I can't remember what the what it replaced was called.
Hot Night.
Hot Night. Yeah. So you suddenly one day said to us, "Well, I want to replace this one with this one." So how did House of Bliss come about? Since it was like, I think it was the last one.
It was. I love House of Bliss as well. It's like it just sneaked in there at the end, and I was so happy with it. But when I got to like the sort of minutia of tracks, I found that Hot Night, the track that was there before, really wasn't doing anything that other tracks weren't doing. It was adding something. It was a good tune, but it wasn't doing anything different. And I was like, I really wanted to get this kind of. Well, I've been watching a lot of this TV show called Pose, which is about the ball scene in New York in the 80s and the 90s. And the music in that is all so good. Like, it's all like kind of dance pop club music from the 80s. I was watching tons of that, and I'd been just listening to tons of Madonna and Janet Jackson and stuff like that. And I was like, with the way our game's aesthetic straddles 80s and 90s, that was one thing I didn't really have in. There was 90s stuff in there, but I really wanted something that was like flat out dance floor 90s. So that I wrote that tune in a day. I just sat down and just blasted the entire thing pretty much, because I had been listening to so much of that style of music that it was just really easy for me to not necessarily replicate, and certainly not in a pastiche way, but in a way where I knew what I wanted it to sound like. So the starting point for that was the snare drum. It has this like huge, aggressive 90s snare drum, and that was the very first thing I got, the drum sound. And then a day later I had the whole tune, and I was super happy with how it turned out.
So in the game, you start off with 3 tracks to create a playlist with, and then you find more music in the world. You go to these towers and pick up new cassette tapes with music on, which then adds to your playlist. And when we got House of Bliss, and when I was putting those pickups of the world, I put that outside Sam's bar because it sounded like a good party tune, and the environmental dressing around Sam's bar is all like the end of the island party. So I thought that was a good. Since we don't have like a dance club in the game, that was the next best place for it, because we've always all the pickups we tried to put in places that are relevant to the song. Like End of the World is, you pick that up outside near the murder scene, near the crime scene, and then like Sunset Song you pick up out on the beach, and then Lady Blue you pick up whilst looking out over the ocean. And who knows when those tracks will play, because it's not like we have a track per area. We have a playlist that the player can customize or randomize, but hopefully they create these little moments of magic where you pick them up and start playing them, or they come on at just the right time, and you kind of get that nice, like those perfect moments, like when you play GTA and something crazy is going on, and then a belter of a pop song comes on.
And, Shores.
Yeah.
Well, what I was saying earlier about the songs really existing in the game. That was something that developed as we went on when you added those, because you wrote all the descriptions, the sort of in-game descriptors for the songs. I love those. I think they are so good. They place the songs so well in the game, and like you said, the actual physical placement of the tracks as well. I think it just the songs are so baked in, because I've never worked with a music system like this before, so originally I was a little apprehensive about it, but I have to say I'm very happy.
Good.
Very happy.
It's something we really wanted to do, like this idea of having music relevant to the world but without being placed just lets you enjoy it as you want, and that's so core to the game. You're supposed to be able to enjoy the game the way you want to enjoy it, and just being able to walk around and really chill with the vibe of the music that works everywhere, but there are certain songs that really highlight a discrete area of the game.
Being able to pick what song you're listening to at what time too. I find myself when I'm playing it, I'm like, we got to this part, so I'll switch to this song. Like, that's nice. That's the good thing about open worlds as well, is any open world, it gives you freedom to shape your experience a bit more. I think it's going to be more memorable, and that the music, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but being able to be like, oh, this is a nice view, let's put an appropriate bit of music on.
There are a couple of parts of the game, and I don't want to talk too much about them for fear of spoilers, but there are a couple of parts of the game where we do force particular tracks to really match the atmosphere. So, there are times when it's a case of, well, we know this music will be appropriate. We really want to highlight this feeling in this area. So we have them. And you've done a really good job of matching this sort of alternate vibe. I don't know if you've heard that word so far, but an alternate vibe from the main sort of more relaxed exploration music to these sometimes darker or sometimes more dramatic pieces as well.
That's a big deal for me, because there are a couple of examples. I don't want to say too much, but you can take two tracks from the soundtrack and they have no common material at all, other than the fact they're married by the game, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. It definitely feels like an album in a lot of ways, rather than a traditional game soundtrack. Which is good, because I listen to a lot of game soundtracks outside of playing games, and it's cool when you have like the Flower, Sun and Rain one. That feels like a soundtrack, because it's a bunch of remixes of like classical tracks, but it feels like a whole, rather than just a collection of tracks that someone's put on a CD. Like a heavily orchestrated game soundtrack which doesn't have any flow. It's just well, we had all these files, we put them in for different areas of the game. We'll stick them on a CD.
I won't get too much into this because it verges on rant territory, but I really think it's a shame that a lot of games have adopted a cinematic approach to music, where music is still thematic, but there's a lot of kind of, I don't want to say filler, because it's doing its intended purpose, but we have none of that music. We have no music that's like, some strings while a scene plays out, or they're all songs.
Yeah, and that's
sorry.
No, I was going to say that's like the core of the game, is that nothing is kind of scripted or linear. I mean, there's the beginning of the game, you have a set number of things to do before you get let out into the open world, but then after that, it is just you choose where to go when and which kind of plot points to hit when, rather than jumping through hoops. So it was important that the soundtrack it's a difficult job for you, I guess, because it has to do an awful lot of work without much direction. Like when in a normal game, where this is the scene in the game where this character dies, and we can write a piece of music that specifically lifts that scene up. That this soundtrack has to do an awful lot of very kind of hard work, has in scenes where there's not a lot of like cinematography or linear narrative.
I did think coming into the project, there was going to be more of that than there ended up being.
We originally intended to be more. There were a bunch of story scenes that we had originally written that we were going to need like bespoke art for, interactions between characters that we just ended up not having as the game became more and more freeform and non-linear. And I think it worked out for the better, but it just means that every part of the game has been more difficult to make than if we'd been doing slightly more linear scenes, and that includes like the soundtrack and the sound design as well.
One of the things about the soundtrack is that whilst we haven't got these like particular, orchestral pieces to sort of fit an area, you have reused themes quite a lot. So our main theme, "Stay Forever," has this theme which you can hear cropping up in other songs in the game, or will be used in Stings as well. So how do you kind of use this one kind of hero track and apply that across to other songs?
I'm a huge fan of thematic music. Like, I've always loved it, especially in games. And like you're saying, Paradise is our theme. So I just wanted other tracks to be evocative of that theme, because it makes connections in your mind with when you heard that previously. You know what I mean? It helps to make a better through. I mean, soundtrack doesn't really have a narrative, but it kind of does, because it has this through narrative thematically. So there's a couple of themes in Paradise that come back, and there's a couple of themes in other songs that are placed in other places. And I'm kind of interested to see if people spot those. But they all, even though they mean nothing in the story, they all mean something to me in my head. For example, there's a theme in Lady Blue, it's like a 16-bar theme that comes back in another track, which I will not mention. But that to me, in my head, is like a theme for Love Dies. That to me is like Love Dies' motif.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with in Paradise. I see one of the melodic themes as being representative of the island, and then the kind of there's a wee bit in the middle of Paradise that comes back in another track. You'll probably know the bit I'm talking about, and that to me is representative of the murder.
Mm-hmm.
So even the three separate themes in Paradise, in my head, they were all representative of other things. So it'll be interested to see when you're playing it how those themes tie the music together and what you get from it, really.
I think there's an awful lot of stuff there that you hear and you might not necessarily associate it and might not make that jump, but it ties it together as a soundtrack so well, rather than these discrete pieces of music. So just having those themes that are repeated, and it's not like it's copy paste. It's like they are, they follow the same progression or whatnot, but they're inspired by, but all transformed to fit the song. And it just makes it a really good, complete experience. And that is the thing I think I love most about this soundtrack, because obviously this is all quite new to us. I've not been directly involved in kind of creating a soundtrack for a game I've worked on before. So there's always this nervous part of how is this going to come together? Is it actually going to be a really good final product, or is it going to be just a collection of so-so songs? And you've done such an incredible job of going way beyond what I expected. Not to gush, but it genuinely has been like I can't quite believe we've got what we've got. It's so good, and way beyond our expectations. And not just in terms of the songs, but how it all ties to the game and how they all tie together to make a complete soundtrack. It's phenomenal.
Well, on you go.
No, I was going to say on tying it together. Like, one of the biggest problems we had, I think, in terms of bringing part of the game to life was the trials. At the end of the game, you collect all your evidence, and then you go to the trial and accuse who you want. And we split up a lot of the trial stuff with UI, like title cards and like kind of moving animations. And for a while, that didn't feel good for ages. And then you and Phil worked on that to bring in all of those stings that I think I'm right in saying that like come from Paradise as well.
Yeah, they're all tied to various things actually, but they're tied to that very first Paradise Killer sting as well, because that's such a huge sound design moment for like, it's Paradise Killer, it's the beginning. So yeah, so even the sound design is thematic with great distances between those two stings.
Yeah.
What?
Gone.
I was just going to say, the bit that I'm probably happiest with is like the very start of Paradise Stay Forever is replicated at the very end of End of the World. Like, it has the same drum pattern, that kind of like the wee percussive bits. That in my head was like the first song and the last song. I mean, it's called End of the World. So that was really getting into a thought process of the person in the world writing this music sees this as the beginning of the world, and as the end is approaching, it's like this was the song that was written, and it's kind of like, oh, that's it, it's all over.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's yeah, like I say, really, really brilliantly tied together thematically throughout. You know, you are a bit of a perfectionist. Obviously, you want to get everything perfect every time. So I've been involved with writing some songs before, and I don't think I would ever know when it's done. I'd constantly want to keep tweaking it and changing it or adding stuff. So how do you say, yeah, that's it? Like you said, you wrote a song in a day. So how did you know that's it? That's what it needs to be?
When listening to a song makes you absolutely miserable, that's what it's done. When you can no longer bear to listen to the song, it's done. I'm not a big astrology guy, but I'm a Virgo, and I am that to an absolute T. I've always been a perfectionist to a fault. Not only a perfectionist, but I'm such a revisionist as well. I can completely finish something and then be like, nope, again. So when I got into the real minutiae of mixing these tracks, it was just a lot of working on them and then taking a break from them and then going back to them and seeing what needed to change. But at some point, I think everyone says this, at some point you just have to divorce yourself from it and say it's done, because you could keep tweaking it forever. And I was getting to that point where I was fixing stuff that didn't even really need fixing. So I guess
I was going to say, you used to send tracks to us, and you said like a first draft, and like, oh yeah, this is fantastic, and then you'd send the next draft, and I never felt like we were giving much feedback because there wasn't a lot of like negatives to say about it. So you know, you're working very independently on that.
That was a big help for me as well, I should say.
Yeah.
So thanks for that.
I just like we're getting these things, and I just feel like I should have so much to say because I really want to be involved in this, but it's just like, well, this is better than I thought it could be. So. Thank you. And that's kind of the only feedback we could give. I think there was very, very little kind of like critical feedback from us because every track did come back pretty much good to go, I think. And then
that was good because for me, this is the most I've ever worked on one project. It's the most music I've ever made in such a short period of time. I always use I put out an album last year, and I use that as an example because it's 10 tracks and it took me 4 years to get together. Just because it was just something I was doing in my spare time and there was no real imperative. But this was something that not only did we have a time scale, that was the thing that was helpful, having the time scale and always trying to come in ahead of that, so I had the freedom to change anything that was bugging me. Because the worst thing about music is I've put out tracks that have just one stupid mistake and you miss it because you know you've listened to it 1,000 times, and on the 1,001th time that's when you would have heard the thing that's going to bug you for the next 5 years. So it was super nice to deliver everything and then have a wee bit of time to be critical of it. And a lot of the mixing was getting into like sadistic territory, but I wasn't doing any of it because I had to. It was never like, this is terrible and it needs to be great. It was just because I loved doing it and I had the time. So
excellent. So how long do you reckon you spent on each track? So one of them you spent a day, and you said Go-Go Style you started and then completed months later. But like, did it take you on average a week a track, do you think? Or
House of Bliss is a good example because it was mostly written in a day, but was probably in another day or two days worth of mixing. So that was maybe like 3 and a bit days total start to finish. But some stuff like Paradise, which has so many elements, was probably a couple of weeks of writing, and then in the interim between that Paradise is the song that spans the entire process of writing this music. It was the first one that was written and it was the last one that was finished. So because we had saxophone recording, vocal recording, so that was much more work. That was probably weeks, because in between doing stuff you're banging your head against mixes because you can, because like I said, you have the time and the freedom. So yeah, on average probably about a week a song, but we know it didn't take 6 months. Most of it was done in 4 months.
Mm.
So it's really just different depending on the song.
Yeah.
I wish that I knew the formula for how long it takes to write a piece of music, but just some music it's done, and other music it's not, and other music you feel like it deserves more time. So it's just dependent, just however long it takes that magic to come out.
And was there any that were really difficult to work on? Were there any that you just couldn't make happen, or that it took a long time, a lot of effort to really get your vision?
Lady Blue went through a couple of iterations. It wasn't hard, it just wasn't where I wanted it to be. But then in the end it was. And again, I was worried because we already had a version of that. I know that because I sent you that so long ago, I was worried that you'd become so attached to it that you'd be like, nah, we like the old one. Whereas in my head I was like, I know that this one's better, so I really hope they like it.
Yeah.
So there was stuff like that wasn't difficult, but there was certain anxieties around that. But then there was some of the bigger tracks like Ego. Mixing the end of Ego was like, it's pretty difficult. Won't hit my mic. Because there's a lot going on at the end of that. There's like a kind of harmony, saxophone, synth solo part, and so much of the mixing I do is influenced by the mastering, because when I was saying earlier, a lot of these tracks don't have common elements. That made mastering them really hard. So if I did something in Ego, I would have to change it, export it, put it into the mastering project, export it from that, and listen to it. And then every time you're making tweaks, it's 2 steps you have to go through. So I think Ego is one that had the most amount of tweaks just to get the balance right between the drums, the sax, the bass. But there were other ones. Last Dance XX is like a super dense tune, but that was just a blast to mix. I had a great time mixing it. I don't know why.
You've combined so many things as well, because when we first started this, I imagined most of the work was going to be synth work, so it was all going to be virtual instruments and everything, but you put actual instruments in there. So you played bass on a few of the tracks. There's definitely real guitar, there's real sax, and there's real world vocals, which is something we'll talk about in a bit, which I guess didn't make it easier for you, having all these, like having to bring in these real instruments, which I guess are harder to mix and harder to keep consistent across tracks.
Yeah, they are. It's always a balance between how much real you want on a project, and then that really comes down to how much time you have, how much money you have, because it takes infinitely longer and it costs infinitely more money to get something on there. But it was a choice to use a lot of that stuff. Like programmed drums, for example, is programmed drums. It's never going to sound like a drummer in a room. But that's fine, because that's what this project needed. Even if we'd had the time, the budget, all that stuff to get a drummer in a room for every single track, I wouldn't have done it. So in a lot of ways, the brief and the style helped me to work efficiently. But yeah, as soon as you start bringing in live elements, it's very hard to mix those with a lot of synthetic elements.
Let's talk a little bit about the vocal track, because that's a thing that when Ollie and I first started out, we said, wouldn't it be cool to have a vocal track? It'll never happen. But here we are with a vocal track, and not just any vocal track. It is absolutely amazing. I love it. I think since I've heard it, there's not a day gone by where I've not listened to it or kind of woken up with it stuck in my head. I know I'm slightly biased, but I absolutely love the style. I love the vocals, who were done by Fiona. So how did that come about? Like, why? How did you get Fiona involved?
When we decided, well, Paradise was the first song I wrote for this project, and it was the one song that I was like, this is a full fat city pop tune, like no compromise. This is a city pop tune. This is me doing that style 100%. So when we started talking about vocals, I much prefer female vocals to male vocals. I have to say, especially in like kind of 80s tunes. And I know a lot of city pop is male vocalists, but since we had a choice, I thought it would be good to do that, and you guys agreed, which was nice. So yeah, we just kind of we had a look at some singers. I got recommended a few locally, because Edinburgh has like an amazing jazz scene, Like I'd seen the band, one of the many bands. I mean, that's why the scene is good. There are so many bands in Edinburgh, and they're function bands or jazz bands or blues bands, and it's a huge pool of like incredibly talented musicians. So I could go to a friend of mine and be like, you know, who are good singers? And I'd seen Fiona singing with her band, the Sunday Sinners, once at the jazz bar. And yeah, we just kind of vetted some singers, had a look at their recordings, and I feel like Fiona was definitely our favorite one. But not only that, she was an absolute joy to work with. She was so good, and we had such a laugh recording. It was amazing. So we made such a good decision there. Like, good on us.
Yeah, she's got such a good, strong voice, and it just sells it. It sells the vibe of it so well.
Well, we had to. Something that was interesting about the writing process for that is, again, the song was written before we wrote the vocals, right? So once I knew more about the game, I could write the lyrics, because the lyrics are about the game. Again, this is an in-world song that's also like a kind of theme song. It fulfills this dual purpose of being about the events of the game, and that can be seen internally or externally, if you know what I mean. But also not quite being like, there's been a murder in paradise. It's not like completely literal, but I think it does a good job of that. So when I wrote the lyrics and I wrote the vocals, and the very first vocal track was me sitting in this chair with like a tiny dynamic mic.
I quite like that. I remember hearing and thinking, you know, we could roll with this. It seems all right, but
that should be an unlockable.
I can sing a tiny wee bit. But the good thing about this is I can't sing this. I always say this to my girlfriend. I always like to imagine this song was so popular you could sing it at karaoke bars. I couldn't sing this song at karaoke bars. It's way too high, and it's like relentlessly powerful as well. So I had to get a mate of mine, Jed, who is an amazing singer. I've known him for years, and he also helped out on engineering the vocals because he has like a studio grade vocal setup. So me and him worked together on the demo that we sent to Fiona, where he did some demo takes that were more than just. And then that was a big part, because his performance was great too. So my performance went into his performance, which went into Fiona's performance.
So it's all down to you, really. You know,
I am the progenitor. So I sung that. That's me singing that. But yeah, we recorded vocals here as well, just in my house. And I think it was like, if we'd done it 2 weeks later, then it would have been very different, because we were in full lockdown after that. So it was one of the last social experiences I had.
God, I'm glad we got that done.
Yeah, amazing song. And we are releasing that track as part of Gamescom in the Arena booth. So if it's not out now, it will be. So keep an eye on our Twitter accounts, or go and find it within the Indie Arena booth.
We should give a shout out to Fabian as well, just before we move on. Fabian Hernandez, who plays sax across the whole soundtrack. I got him on a bunch of tracks. He's amazing. One of the best musicians I've worked with.
Yeah, that saxophone's so good.
It's like everyone we put out a trailer which had that sax in it, and everyone's like, oh man, that saxophone. It is just, it's so good. It's so dramatic, and just, it's unlike what you hear in a lot of songs these days. It's absolutely wonderful. I showed it to played to a couple of friends of mine who play sax, and they love it. It's
and we should say that
really
that's on a compilation. Black Screen Records are putting out a vinyl compilation of indie game soundtracks, and I think, is it still available? Is it sold out?
It's still available.
Still on pre-order, yeah.
It's free.
Yeah, and it's the full vocal track "Paradise Stay Forever" is on that. Definitely check that out.
I'm not precious about my music in the sense that it has to all be me. Like, I can play guitar, and I play a few guitar solos on there, but there were a couple of guitar solos on there where I know that this guy Thomas, that I've worked with a whole bunch, I just know he would do a better job. So I'm quite happy to be like, here you go, man.
Hand that over. Yeah.
I'm very lucky to know like a ton of good musicians, like incredible musicians, basically on my doorstep. Very, very lucky.
Cool. So, what's your favorite track?
My favorite track is Last Dance XX because
Okay.
it is the densest, most jazz fusion inspired track on there. Again, that was one of the last ones I did, and the methodology for that in my head was just absolutely mental. That's what came out. There's like it's such a great track. It has like bandoneon in it. It has 2 organ solos. It's the most indulgent thing. Like
I always love it when I'm listening to a track. Is it go-go style that's got like these panpipe things going on in there? I would never have thought to put them in there, and then they're there and you hear them, and it's just like it's such a perfect match, but not one I would have ever imagined working. So yeah, it's great that you pull in these different things.
I mean, I really love all the tracks. I get incredibly attached to my art, as I'm sure you guys do. So it's such a buzz for me to have written 20 plus tracks in the last 6 months and love all of them. Because as I said earlier, my previous thing was, I wrote 10 tracks in 4 years. Yeah, I thought they were pretty good, but no, I'm super happy with I love every track in this. There's really not one that I don't like. So.
What about you, Ollie? What's your favourite?
I'm a sucker for vocal tracks, so it's definitely Paradise Stay Forever. I'm going to be honest and say that when we first put it into the game, I wasn't a fan of End of the World. Like that is not really my kind of thing, but you guys really believed in it, so like that's fine by me. It goes in, and now it's the one that sticks in my head. Like that's the one that really stands out to me. Yeah, and I really like it now.
It has that kind of mariachi Castlevania bit at the start.
Yeah.
When I was writing it, I was like, I know this is too much, but I know it will work. And I think so much of that song is having the right title for it. If you called it something else, I don't think it would have fit.
Yeah.
But calling that song End of the World and making it a kind of weird audio representation of the world actually ending, I think that's cool.
I think it really works. And it's in one of the earliest areas that you can access in the game. So it is one that will then, you pick up early on, and you get some loops of that in. And I think it's one of the more distinctive tracks because of that intro. And it helps create a good sense of like pace through whatever playlist you've compiled. It helps. Like some of the other ones do this as well, with like the big like drum intros and stuff on some of them. And I think that one really works. And then I was a huge fan of some of the secret tracks, which we're not talking about for specific areas. And I remember there's one where I can't remember which one of you put it in as an issue. Like, is this too loud? Is this too much?
Oh, I put that in.
Yeah. And no, absolutely not. Just close that bug off straight away.
Blast out.
Yeah, because it's so different, and there's that one, and then there's the one we were talking about earlier, which is so different again, but still thematically consistent, and really sells the area that it's used in.
I can't wait until this is out for about a year. Then we can actually talk about all these tracks without giving out spoilers.
I know the one you're talking about is one that I don't have a lot of contact with Guy. When Guy is our QA guy, I don't have a lot of contact with him when he's actually doing his game stuff, but he occasionally would say stuff to me. And that track you're talking about was one where he first went into that area when you guys added that track. He really, really liked it because it's so oppressive almost in a way that none of the other music is.
Yes.
It's like, fuck, oh my God. It's like having a bad time. I love that tune though. It's so good. I can see that on goth dance floors across the world.
Yeah. I was, for a while, I was like, okay, these are good tracks and they need to be pickups in the world that you can add to your playlist. Once you've heard them, you go to this area, you hear it the first time, and then you pick it up. But then it can't. I didn't do that because that would have kind of undone a lot of the good work around the rest of the soundtrack and how the playlist work and the impact that area has. Because in my head, it was just like, we just put everything in. Every piece of music we've got, put in as a collectible. Like the vocal theme, I thought we were going to put that in as a collectible. But like you said, that just, it's too distracting. You can't have that kind of thing in there.
It's easier to hold back on some stuff because we have such a bounty of stuff.
Yeah.
and especially in terms of the amount of tracks we have and the amount of stuff there is in the world, because there's so much of it, and so much of it's like compelling too, that we have the luxury of being like, now we'll hold off on this. This is for special. This is for a special thing. I love that. I love that too. I love being able to do that.
But all the tracks are available on the soundtrack, which you can buy. So if you're really attached to one of these area specific things, go buy that soundtrack and enjoy the full thing. And it's a real treat to listen to. So enjoy that.
Oh, cheers, man. I appreciate it.
You've done a good job.
I would personally, if people are watching this, they like the music and they love the game, I'd be interested to hear from people about what they thought about the music and what their favorite parts were. Because I have my favorite parts, having played it a whole bunch. I would just be really interested to hear what people think of it, as I'm sure you guys would.
We've seen a few people who have played it, who streamed it, and a few written reviews as well, and people really seem to be vibing on it. People have specifically called out certain tracks as being like really called them out as being great. And I think that's wonderful because whilst I believe kind of soundtracks need to fit into the game, the fact that people are recognizing them as these kind of individual pieces as being really fantastic, both in and out of the game is wonderful.
We really hit everything we wanted. Like, I remember those initial conversations, and obviously when you have these early conversations, you're like, shit, there's a lot of work to do between now and then, but like I think we hit everything we wanted and then some. Like, we've exceeded our targets,
I think so. And I think some of the more special moments that took a load of work to do, like when at the beginning of the game where you drop down to the island and we bring in the music and you get that cool bass slide and stuff, like those things were hard to do, but it's such a cool moment that players have already commented on as being fantastic. So I was really happy that we got a really cool soundtrack and the moments.
Yeah, part of that I would just like to say I found Phil very easy to work with in terms of being able to ask a question and see how that would work, how that could be implemented. And I think for me as a composer and the kind of person I am, like, I love to have involvement at that level because it makes me feel like I can do better work. So I'm very glad that we had the time to look at stuff and be like, how does this actually work, instead of just handing off all the stuff. I could have done, here's all the songs, here's all the soundtrack, have a great time implementing it. But some of the best stuff I think came out of our back and forths.
It's really difficult when you're a small team because basically this is it, right? Ollie and I full time. You've done probably way more hours than you should on the soundtrack, and we've had a couple of other people helping us too. But we're such a small team that we don't have someone dedicated to implementing the audio. So your directions, like when you you send a note saying, right, we need this sound triggering as this happens on screen, and then it transitions to this, and you've worked out where the fade should go and stop, and you providing that has made it easy to put in as well.
It helps that Phil doesn't know how to say no. Like Phil just does whatever you ask.
This is why I bypass you and go straight to Phil. That's why, man.
When my stress kicks in, I get all aggro, whereas Phil manages to maintain a much more level head and just says yes to anything you ask of him.
That's the harmony of the team, though. This is
and Phil does. Phil,
it's hard to say no when an idea comes in. Well, if we just do this, and I think, well, I could probably do that in half an hour. And inevitably, it takes a bit longer. But like when I've heard how good it could be, it's hard to say no to that.
And a lot of the stuff that we do is systems based. So like, and you design all those systems. So there is the framework there to put these things in. Whereas, I've worked on games which aren't very systems based, and any time there is some extra sound design to go in, that is a non-trivial amount of work, like to get the system to cope with it, and then it has to propagate out onto all of these events. Whereas like Phil writes a single system, and then it triggers the event, and it's all good.
I've always kind of seen it as my job to get out of your way as well. So like you need a thing doing, if I start saying no, then at what point do I say yes? So I can turn down these ideas because it sounds too big and too unmanageable. But I always think I should investigate it properly and give it a go, and then we can at least say no with authority if it's a problem. And I think that just propagates out. So if someone's got an idea, I think, well, it's definitely worth trying. I'll say yes, and then if it really can't happen, it's a no. But I do like to try everything. I think as a programmer, you do need to just support the more creative people in the project.
I think as far as the audio process goes, I think we all tempered each other quite well to make sure we got to our end result. Because, like I was saying earlier, I'm a massive revisionist. So you do have to at some point say, "No, we can't do that." Because I do that to myself. I'm like, "No, I can't do that." Then 5 minutes later, I'm like, "Maybe I could do that though." I did do that. And then
maybe that hi-hat needs to be there. Maybe one more hit.
Yeah. I remember I was talking to you about that End of the World mix. I was like, "Do you think those hi-hats need to come down?" You were like, "No," and I was like, "Cool." But then I was like, "But did he though? Did he need to come down there?"
Yeah, you are talking to someone who loves a good hi-hat. So I'm like, no, more hi-hats. Put the hi-hats, especially in that kind of track. Like, I play quite a lot of kind of ska music, and it's got reggae, and End of the World's got this reggae influence. And having those hi-hat lifts and things, it's just, yep, I want to hear them. I want to hear them nice and clear. So it works for me.
We had the right environment for getting this done to the degree it got done, and I think that's a wee bit of magic in that, like, definitely.
Yeah, and I think it's with a bigger team, it might not have been so good either. The more people you have trying to assert their influence over things, it can take away the creative process. And it's been really important for us to have you specifically, because somebody else couldn't have created this. We needed you to do it, and you've done a great job of coordinating everyone else you've worked with. But if we had a bigger team, or if you'd been part of a bigger company, I don't think it would have worked quite the same way it has. It's not got that magic. And so much of the game is based on this: what can we do as a small team? What can we do? And it turns out can make a really good soundtrack.
Made a really good game.
Yeah,
Phil. Not sell the game.
We made a soundtrack. There's a game part as well, but
that's exciting for me because we've been promoting the soundtrack. But I said this the other day, I can't wait to be like, but guess what? There's also a video game, and the game is amazing. So, it's good. It's good to have put so much of myself into the finished product. That's pretty good.
That was the same for us.
Yeah.
Like, that's the reason we quit our jobs to make a game, rather than having someone else tell me what my work needed to be. It was we want to make our own thing, whether it works or not. We want to make our own thing, and that everyone that's worked on this game, it has been nice to just like leave them to it, like choose who you want to work with. And so when it comes to the soundtrack, it's like, here's the spec, here's what we're doing, and then you go away and make loads of cool stuff. And like Giga, our character artist, give them a load of ref, they come back with something awesome, and like Guy, just leave him to the QA, and he's finding all sorts of gnarly stuff I didn't know about. And
not necessarily as awesome, but he's
and it's been cool to just, we get to make something that we want, but then also allow other people to do something cool that they want to do as well.
Yeah. So, I guess, unless there's anything else, we can wrap this up. And I want to say that, obviously, you can wishlist Paradise Killer on Steam right now. You can pre-order on Switch right now. Obviously, if you're watching this after it's released, just go and buy it. You can also get the soundtrack, and that will be available on Steam. It'll be available on Bandcamp as well. And you can, of course, follow us. So we are at Kaizen Gameworks on Twitter. And Barry?
I am at No Stopping Epoch on Twitter. You can also get me at soundcloud.com/No Stopping Epoch.
And that's where some of your previous work is as well, right? Like the album you put out last year.
Yeah, there'll be some
go
Paradise
check
Killer
that
stuff on there too. Yeah.
Amazing.
Good.
Right.
A high-powered outro. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. we know that people love the soundtrack and love the game, so please, like Phil says, wishlist. I don't like begging, but the algorithm determines the success. Like, if we get enough wish lists, instead of curating, Steam's algorithm will bump us up and we'll get some visibility. So even if you're going to buy it on Switch or not at all, just what's your problem? But also, can you please go and wishlist it, and then
watched a lot of a video if you're not intending to buy the game.
and then go and buy the soundtrack as well. There's a deluxe version on Steam, and then there's the Bandcamp version, and hopefully we've got some more exciting stuff about the soundtrack to announce in the future. Ooh.
Yeah. Ooh.
For now, though, let's close the door and stay forever.
Hey!
Here in paradise.
Listen to the vocal track.